The Brooklyn Vegan Show is a podcast about music brought to you by the music blog and online record store Brooklyn Vegan. Make sure to subscribe to hear all of our upcoming episodes featuring interviews with musicians and more, and find us 24/7 at brooklynvegan.com, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Hey, welcome to the new episode of the Brooklyn Vegan Show. I'm BV editor Andrew Sacker, and today's episode is an interview with Bob, Nanna, and Chris Broach of the band Braid. If you're unfamiliar, Braid were one of the most important emo bands of the 90s, and they've remained one of the most influential bands on the genre for over 25 years straight. One of the big reasons that I gave Bob and Chris a call for this chat is that their classic 1998 album Frame and Canvas turns 25 this year, and Braid are celebrating with a reissue that's been remixed and remastered by the album's original producer, Robbins of Jawbox, as well as their first live shows in 7 years. I caught Braid the last time they reunited, around which time they put out their comeback album No Coast, a very, very good album, and Braid were awesome at those shows, and I'm really stoked to see them again on this tour. Frame and Canvas is a great record. It's one of my personal favorites of all time, as well as an album that's rightfully on just about every list of the best emo albums that you'll ever find. I mean, if you haven't heard that record and you're listening to this podcast, I highly recommend just checking that out and then listening to this episode, because it's a really, really great record, and we spend a lot of this episode talking about that album. We also talk about a lot of Braid history, from Chris and Bob's musical upbringings to when they met each other and formed Braid and landed on the sound that ultimately became the classic sound of Braid in general and Frame and Canvas. Chris reminisces on being high school classmates with the members of Cap and Jazz. Bob talks about being starstruck when they entered the studio with Jay Robbins. They get into why Braid broke up in the first place. They talk about the emo explosion of the 2000s, as well as the emo revival of the 2010s, and much more. It was a super fun chat, and I'm really excited for you to hear it. Also, Brooklyn Vegan has an exclusive white, clear, and blue splatter vinyl variant of the original mix of Frame and Canvas that's limited to just 300 copies, and you can pick up a copy in our store, shop.brooklynvegan.com. You can also find the link in the description of this episode. Before we get to the episode, a little bit about our sponsor, DistroKid. DistroKid is a service for musicians that allows you to easily upload your music to all major streaming platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, and more. DistroKid allows you to do automatic revenue splits so collaborators and co-writers can get paid too. It provides you with an artist page that links to your music on all streaming services. It allows you to add lyrics, credits, and liner notes, and more. You can get 30% off of your first year's membership by signing up at distrokid.com/VIP/BrooklynVegan. We've also included the link in the description of this episode, and you can click directly from there. And now, my chat with Bob and Chris from Braid. Hey guys, what's up? Welcome, Bob.
Thanks for having us.
Chris, what's up?
Hey.
So, how are you guys? What's going on in your lives today?
I'm good. I'm just doing I'm doing some training for coaching, for soccer coaching. That's what I'm doing. I'm coaching my son's soccer team, so that's what I'm doing today. I was just doing all this stuff on like codes of conduct, all that stuff. That's fun. But yeah, we just finished rehearsing this weekend for the first time in a while for this upcoming tour. Bob was here yesterday, and the rest of the guys were here. So that's kind of where we're coming from.
I hope that you're going to be teaching your, players to yell "yeah" when they score goals.
I'll be yelling "yeah."
Well, okay, good. That's true. At least someone will be.
Someone will.
I'm just at my day job here, just taking some time off, and yeah, just having a decent Monday. I think having practiced this past weekend with Chris and Todd and Damon, there's a spring in my step a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's gray as hell and it's like cold and it's Monday, I'm happy.
Yeah, it went really well. It was really a lot of fun. Yeah.
That's great news. How did it feel to be finally playing together after, what is it now, like 7 years since the last Braid show?
Yeah, we were figuring this out. I think it might have been five. I think the last Braid show was in 2016, but we might have only done one show that year. It was at the Fest. Mm-hmm. So 5-6 years or at
No, if
least.
it was 2016, that's 7 years. That's nuts.
I'm terrible at math. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so
It's crazy.
it
It
was
doesn't
it was
feel
fun.
like it. We were supposed to play in 2020, but then COVID hit and all this other stuff. And so it was like everything got put on hold for a long time. So it's kind of like exciting to have everything back to sort of in this normal state so we can start pushing through and doing some of this stuff. And the 25-year anniversary happened right at the time when it's time to start thinking about playing again, or what are we going to do. So that was exciting. That's exciting too.
Yeah, and on that note, we're having this conversation because of the 25th anniversary of Frame and Canvas, the reissue, the tour. And I feel like if we're going to get into the story of that album, we should also back up a bit. So let me start by asking you each separately, before you knew each other, before Braid formed, what were some of your key experiences that made you realize you wanted to pursue music, or specifically punk or hardcore or emo, for the rest of your lives?
I mean, I could be sort of quick. I've been a music lover since like I was born. Basically, my parents realized it right away, and they weren't into music. I really liked top 40 stuff, and I liked metal, like in grade school and stuff. But that seemed like rock star stuff, and whatever. I was a kid, I didn't know what that meant, but it was just like unattainable for me. I can't shred like all of these people that are on stage. I don't look as good as them. I'm uncomfortable on stage. But then it was in the end of grade school when I started getting into more like hardcore and punk, and so like Minor Threat, right? You liked metal, you might like Minor Threat, or you might like Bad Brains or something like that. Started getting into that, and then it wasn't until I think it was just a random person in high school when I got to high school. Random person in high school knew someone that like kind of did shows in the area. So when I realized that like there was like a scene, this was I grew up in the city in Chicago, but then in high school I moved to the western suburbs, and there was like a scene there where people were doing shows at like VFW halls and people's basements and stuff like that. And I would be able to go to the show and actually talk to the people, and they were just as cool or as uncool as I was, and they were interested in talking to me about like playing or whatever. These people my age. And then one last thing, there was an all ages club named McGregor's in Elmhurst that like every band, like a lot of the bands that we got into, the punk bands, Screeching Weasel, Green Day,
Yeah.
Jawbreaker, they weren't playing Chicago. They were playing Elmhurst. They were playing this place in at McGregor's. It was an all ages. They did all ages shows on Sunday nights, and my friends and I went to every single one of them. And the bands we were playing were so cool and friendly, and like I said, wanted to talk. And that was when I realized like I could do that. Now I could do this.
Yeah.
Now I feel comfortable doing it. So
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah. I mean, to really, I mean, my story is pretty similar to Bob's. I grew up, liking music. Sure. I played music and, took some guitar lessons when I was young, and didn't really stick with it, but I always kind of I had an electric guitar and an amp that I played, and I would try to learn how to play like the Star Spangled Banner like Jimi Hendrix, because my dad was really into like that 60s and 70s music, like Hendrix and stuff like that, Beatles, Cream, Creedence Clearwater Revival, all that stuff. And he used to play it around when I was a kid. Again, same as Bob. Like none of it really, like I didn't connect the dots. Like, oh, that's a thing I want to do. It was just I was just playing around. It was fun, and I think we played in the garage with a couple of people, but there was nothing happening. We were just like, oh, playing in the garage. Like I remember the cops coming to my house, and if you remember Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, they're like, oh, what is this, Wild Stallions? And like I remember us just like laughing because it wasn't at all like that, right? But uh, but really, same thing, man. I got to high school, and I was into like junior high, I was into like, hair metal and all this stuff. And I was really into rap music. I had like, I would go to this Blockbuster. Well, it used to be called Sound Warehouse. And I would buy like all the rap I could get. I was super into like Kool Moe Dee and LL Cool J and stuff in the late 80s. And then somewhere, somehow, somebody was like, I started skateboarding, and skateboarding was that entrance into this whole culture that I was just totally unaware of. It changed me almost, I would say, over a summer. My friend who I was skateboarding with was like, "Hey, check out," and it was literally Minor Threat. Check out this band, right? And before that, it was like I had the Bon Jovi tapes and Guns N' Roses, and then all my rap stuff that I was into, and then overnight I was like, holy cow, what is this? I've never heard anything like this in my life. It totally was like spoke to me. I got it. I understood. Like I was like, what is this? And I would listen to this tape in the car on little vacations with my parents, like, with my headphones on and in a cassette Walkman. Anyway, fast forward, I get into high school, and the same thing. All of a sudden, there are people playing music, and there's a scene. And what? There's a basement show happening down the street with friends of mine playing in a band. Awesome! I'm going to go see that. And then, like, we're just all hanging out, like Bob said, after the show, talking, and some friends and I started a band. And then all of a sudden, we were opening for our friend's band in the basement. And then the Western suburb scene was a scene I was aware of, the scene that Bob's talking about, because my friends' bands were playing with those bands. And so we started to all of a sudden see that, like I did, that there was more than just playing a basement show here. We could go play a basement show or a VFW hall in a different suburb, right? Or in somewhere else. And they would come to our suburbs, and we would just, and then it blew up from there. It was like, wow, there's this band from DC coming through, and we're going to play this show. What? This is a band I love, like Lungfish came through, we were
Hoover.
really into the DC scene, Hoover, those bands. And of course, Green Day came through, and I was going to like the bigger shows in the city at the time. Like I was really into like new wave as well. New wave, like The Cure and some of that old shoegaze, like Curve and you remember that band Curve, and what was that other band?
Chris, there's a new Depeche Mode record that came out last Friday
I
too.
heard about it and I haven't listened yet.
I listened to it. Half of it I think is really good.
I listened to the Van Pelt today. But,
Okay, yeah, cool.
Yeah, it's. I'm not gonna.
We're not giving our reviews here.
We're not doing reviews now. But yeah, that was the same for me. So I started playing in bands, and that's like, and actually I found out about, long story, really long, to make a long story longer, the friends that I was playing with and hanging out with were Captain Jazz guys. I went to high school with them. And Bob was playing in Friction over in the western suburbs, and those bands knew each other. And so I knew about Bob's band before I even met Bob for Braid, like a year or two before. So there was just this connection. And that's really where all of this kind of came to fruition for us. We met at college, my first week at college, went to go see Braid play. They'd played like, a handful of shows, left the show as a member of the band, and then the rest is sort of history. I remember Roy running around going, "This is Chris. He's a new member of the band." Yeah, introducing me, and I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" Anyway, that was a long story, but yeah, that's sort of it. Yeah.
No, that was great. And yeah, so I mean, like you said, you went to high school with the members of Cap and Jazz. So like, here's just like your classmates, and between you and them, I mean, it's like this whole, now what we look at is like this nationally important scene is formed, like from people, I guess, who are just school friends.
Yeah.
Like when you were doing it at the time, like,
Yeah.
was there any idea of like this could be important, or was it straight up just like me and my friends hanging out doing something we love? Like,
I mean, that's strictly, I mean, truly, yeah. Like these guys this is awesome. I mean, I remember going to see like Captain Jazz play with other bands, and we'd go to like other suburbs to see him. And the other bands were still doing this like sort of Chicago punk style, like Bull Weevils, 8 Bar style, And it was, Captain Jazz was this unique, they were so unique that people didn't really latch onto them right away. But they started to. And I think once I went away to college, I started to see that, like, and still, I don't think people latched onto that whole scene until much later. It happened later. So I don't think so. I mean, for me, it was just exciting to go play somewhere else with other bands, see what other bands are doing, and just hang out and be part of doing this thing that we loved. I mean, that's what it was.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that it was very important to us. Like, it was really, really important to us, and we would see bands like Captain Jazz and Gage play, and it would be a huge community get together, and everyone would go crazy. But if Gage or Captain Jazz were to play Minneapolis, there'd be nobody there. And same thing when Braid started. There were, we would go on tour and we would do, really well in a basement in Champaign or in a house in Champaign, but it'd be like we really had to work hard at being relevant to people outside of, our general area, I think.
Yeah, and we had this influence, and we were playing with some of the bands from different places that were into it, but it was really not like we never I don't we were just trying to do it, just have fun.
Yeah. And to your point about Cap'n Jazz sounding not really like the other Chicago punk stuff, I mean, I would say the same for pretty much right off the bat with Braid. I mean, that first 7-inch, I feel like you kind of already tap into the sound that, Frame and Canvas has. What were like some of your influences at the time? Like, what were you sort of trying to either follow or react against or, combine?
I mean, for me, when Braid started, I was really starting. That was my first time really playing guitar in a band, but also like in general. So I was learning on the job, so to speak.
Yeah,
It really so, and I think we were probably when Braid started, we were all very self-taught. Like, and Roy,
yeah,
our drummer at the time, was just had this really wild, unique style, and I had this wild, unique style just because I was kind of bad at playing guitar. But I was like, because of seeing bands like Captain Jazz and Gage, especially seeing their guitar players play, I'm like, I want to play like that. Like, I know he does these, slides up and down and does these weird chords and stuff, and I'm like, I'll learn some basic stuff from like this book, but like otherwise, I'm just gonna mess around and try and make my
that's right.
make my music sound like theirs. And then so I think it was just sort of all of us bringing that sort of, I'll say, amateur energy, but
Yeah.
it all together, we were able to not implode. We were able to actually create some things.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, for me too, Bob, the same thing. Certainly we were influenced by, our friends and the bands we were seeing, like Captain Jazz, Gage,
Yeah.
um, but also we were heavily influenced by the DC scene.
Well, yeah.
Like we all listen to Fugazi, religiously, almost, if you will, right?
Yeah.
And then a lot of Discord stuff. We'd all been listening to Discord stuff for a long time by then, anyway. When I joined Braid, that was the first band that I played guitar a little bit in a band here or there. I tried to play guitar in a band in high school, and I wasn't that good. So this guy would try to write parts for me, and I couldn't even play them. I mean, so I remember I went to a show with this guy, and he was the only guitarist, and I used to just be a singer. I just used to sing in bands or yell or whatever, right? And so we got to the show, and this guy refused to play a show, right? And so the guitarist did, because someone wanted to search his bag for alcohol, and we were like straight edge. So he was like, "Oh, I don't have alcohol in my bag, F you." So I remember saying, "I'm going to go home and learn how to play guitar, because I don't want to have to deal with that again." So I would play guitar for like 2-3 hours every night in my senior year of high school. Just every night played it. And it was just doing what Bob said. Same stuff. I would just listen to what I heard, and I learned how to play by ear. Sure, I had musical training and stuff because I took clarinet and stuff in band and took some piano lessons here and there, but it was really just playing by hand, right? I knew the basic chords and I knew how to play a power chord, but it was just putting my fingers in different places and trying to make the guitar sound cool, and do some cool, chunky stuff, and have, throw some distortion on and kill it. So but yeah, and then us, like, we were all listening to that stuff, but we were also, because we were coming from this scene where there would always be these like distros there. Like, someone would have this like small distro that would have this 7-inch of like a band like Julia, or a band
Yeah.
like
They'd set up like a
Indian
table at a
Summer,
show.
set up at a table. And this is where you'd get your new music. We weren't listening to the radio. There was nothing on the radio that at that point that I was interested in. So everything I was getting was buying 7-inches from bands that were playing with, like, I remember driving to Sheboygan to see Captain Jazz with all of our friends, and getting into like a bunch of bands that played that show, Shotmaker, and I think Indian Summer, and some other bands, buying the 7-inches at the show, and then being like, this is what I'm into. this is awesome because it was unique. It was stuff that I'd never heard of. And they were all coming, I think, from very similar backgrounds. Like, did we only listen to DC stuff? No, no, no. We listened to the Lookout Record stuff, right? We listened to the punk stuff. We still listen to Bad Religion and, Operation Ivy and Misfits, all that. So we grew up with all the punk, right? So I think, it was all that, right? But it was really, for me, my influence was the people I was seeing on stage playing in basements and in small venues. That was influencing me because I was like, oh, I like how they do that thing. Let's do a thing like that. We would talk about it. We'd be like, oh, let's do a thing like this. So like how, oh, that sounds like this kind of a part, right? Where we'd be like, oh, that kind of sounds like this band a little bit, but it just put a part in that's like, oh, there's a cool break here, right? Let's do this. But we were also just trying to do fun stuff. We weren't trying to do 3-chord punk. We were trying to just do something interesting, right? And we were really interested in different time signatures. I know I was, and so was Bob. So we all were.
So just kind of like to continue that, like, as Braid moves on with your career, you start to meet like-minded bands like, say, the Get Up Kids or Rainer Maria, right? And you kind of like, tell me about, once Braid starts getting more established, you're touring more, you have full-length albums out, and you're seeing like, oh, there's these other bands in like pockets of the country that we feel like-minded with, and we feel a kinship with, and we want to do a split with them or go on tour with them, like, and then you start to see like, oh, there's this whole community that we're part of.
Yeah, I think it was Damon or somebody recently was talking about this and just really nailed it in a way that for some reason it just didn't occur to me. And that was like, I was saying earlier that like we had to work kind of hard at not just being relevant in Chicago,
Yeah.
or in the Chicago area. On our first record, we put in the record like, we want to be on your comp, and maybe it was, I don't know. It didn't seem like it was on purpose or something that we were planning on doing, but that was sort of like our way of, if somebody in Seattle or whatever was going to do a comp, we'll be on it. So that now all of a sudden, if there are a bunch of Seattle bands on that comp, now we're on it too, and they'll hear our band. Or same with if we'll do a split, we did this all the time, especially when we were starting out as a band, because luckily we had access to friends who had recording setups at their house. So like, hey, we're going to do a split with Pogo or split with Beezus, a split with Get Up Kids, all these,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. We just wrote this new song. Let's go record it and send it to them in that way. But like it didn't really occur to me. But like, nah, hey, we just did a split 7-inch with Korn from DC. Now when we go play DC, we'll play with Korn and there'll be people there. Like,
And they heard us, right? And
Yeah.
that means that when we come there with our records, because they're doing the same thing, they were doing the same thing that we were
Yeah.
doing. I was buying 7 inches at shows. Their scene was buying 7 inches at shows. I was buying comps at shows with
Yeah.
bands. I mean, the way that I got into a lot of the Chicago scene was because I remember Tim Kinsella walking around my high school with the Octune Chicago Spy compilation, which had, Captain
Cam
Jazz,
Jam,
Boll Weevils, 8 Bar,
Smoking Popes.
Smoking Popes, all these bands on it. And that was my first exposure to all of it. And that, to me, that was an explosion. That gave me the whole context for what the scene was. I didn't realize it at the time, right? But the fact that we would be on a comp out of Indianapolis or Florida or somewhere else, it was like, someone will have heard of us now. So if we go play there, because we're playing someone's basement, they're like, oh, our friend's band's playing, but also I got that comp with this band Braid. I'm going to go see them. The reason I went to see Braid play in Champaign or in Urbana when I went down there is I had a comp with Braid on it because Captain Jazz was on it, and also I knew Bob from his old band Friction because they'd played some shows together too. I didn't know him yet, but I knew of him, right? So that's why I went. I mean, it was because of this scene. So that was how we also, because there weren't, like, it was like giving people a mixtape back then, right? There wasn't a Spotify playlist that you could go get press and do all this stuff. That was what that was, right? So that's kind of what that doing all those different splits and comps was.
So you were one of the first bands signed to Polyvinyl, and I feel like Framing Canvas is one of the label's first major full-length releases. How did that relationship come about originally?
Yeah. Braid began in Champaign-Urbana, which is like, middle of the state of Illinois, and just east of Champaign is Danville, which is a smaller town. But when I got to Champaign and when Chris got to Champaign, those two scenes were sort of intertwined. There were people that were like skateboarding and stuff, and so
It was really through skateboarding that
yeah,
those knew Todd and Roy knew Matt.
Matt,
Used to skate together. So Matt would come to Champaign, they'd go skate in Danville because Todd and Roy grew up down in that area.
yeah, and so like Matt literally booked the very first Braid show that we played. It was in 1993 in Danville at Garfield Park, like a park field house. And he was doing a zine at the time, like everyone was kind of doing a zine. And then that zine became, he did a record or like a 7-inch record or something that came with the zine. And then it became, well, I kind of want to do a label. Like he was really, really there from the very beginning. And so like when, he developed sort of the infrastructure to make a label, like we were psyched to be a part of that sort of growth or the beginning of it.
Yeah, and I remember we had done some stuff with like. Are you talking about like Framing Canvas, or how did the original, the original one? I think
I'm Afraid of Everything they did.
Yeah, they first did I'm Afraid of Everything 7-inch, and he was like, "Yeah, I want to do a 7-inch." We're like, "Okay," because we first of all said yes to everyone, right? But also, he put it out, and he was super cool about it, and he kept asking if we wanted to do stuff. Oh, you want to be on this comp? Yeah, let's be on the comp. And that's how that relationship started.
And I'll just say it's like incredible that like because that they're thriving right now. Like what they're just so brilliant and on the pulse of like all of this cool new music. They never got pigeonholed into just an emo thing or this other thing. Like they were. I'm just so impressed by Matt and Darcy.
I think in the beginning, maybe they did. Like at the very beginning, like after Framing Canvas or right before that, they were putting out Raina Maria. They were like reissued the Captain Jack and a bunch
American
of stuff.
football.
But then American football. But then they started expanding, and of course now they're a real force. It's amazing.
It's incredible.
Yeah,
it's like amazing to see. I mean, I'm like 32, so I kind of came to the you had broken up already, but polyvinyl was like one of the first big things for like me and my friend group. We were just diving down like all the Kinsella bands and Braid and Maria. And then it was like this whole thing with like all these, but then all of a sudden it's like, wait, now they have Of Montreal, and like, and then it was like, from there, it just kind of,
it's weird. Like, I did the same thing with Discord. I remember like getting zines or like Maximum Rock and Roll or a zine like that always had a Discord ad. I would buy anything Discord put out. So like when it would be like Shudder to Think, right? Didn't sound like Fugazi at all. I'd be like, oh, I don't know. And then I'd be like, oh, actually, this is really cool. I like it. So yeah, maybe the same thing happened with people that just were into polyvinyls, like curation, for lack of a better word, of like cool music.
I think that happened for sure. I mean, there was a lot of just like, I feel like really eccentric, quirky bands on polyvinyl that like were big parts of the lives of people I knew. And it was just because it was like, kind of like you said, like probably on a polyvinyl comp at first or something. And then, you just like get into it from there. So yeah, I think they did a great job at like cultivating like an audience that would trust them.
Totally. Yeah. And I'll say one thing, Matt was like, yeah, we're going to put out the record, and, it's going to be 50-50 split, which is what we were used to. And that was the way Framing Canvas came about was a whole other thing. We were ready to do another record, and I don't remember what we were doing. We were talking about, we didn't want to do it with the same labels we'd worked with before, and I remember us talking about it and just being, I at least I remember saying that, Matt's been pretty good to us. He's put out this stuff. He's doing all right, and let's talk to him. So I remember, I don't know where we went, Bob. Do you remember? It was some restaurant in Champaign.
Coffee shop, I think.
Yeah, some place.
Coffee shop. Kobe? No.
Maybe.
Something like that.
Kobe or something. We went to some coffee shop
with him.
With Matt. We ended up signing the contract there and doing it, and I think because And he was willing to pay for our recording. He's like, I'll pay for it. And we had recorded everything for basically for free or next to nothing. And he's like, yeah, I'll send you out to Jay Robbins had expressed interest in doing the record. We had asked him, and he's like, I'll pay for it. So we're like, you got it. So yeah.
Yeah, and hey, speaking of Jay Robbins, you were talking before about being so into the DC scene. So I mean, it must have been awesome to record that Inner Ear with Jay Robbins,
Oh
right?
God.
I mean,
It was like a dream. I mean, it
so
was like a dream that I never knew I had coming true. You know what I mean? Like, because it was so far out of reach, like to do something like that for me growing up, that like, sure, we'd recorded at cool little studios here and there. And we recorded at Steve Albini's basement just for something and stuff like that. But to go out to this place that was, in my mind, just this iconic place that put out so much, all these bands recorded in, and then to be doing it with this guy Jay Robbins, who I used to sit in my bedroom as listening to Discord and looking at the lyrics of stuff, who's going to be producing and recording the record. It was just like, we've arrived. This is it. This is like the pinnacle. That's what I felt like. I remember feeling that way at the time. Like, I can't
Yeah,
believe
we were at least I was such a big Jawbox fan. Even when we were recording, I was still a little like starstruck.
Yeah.
Recording with like him being in the same room as us was like,
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I remember you pointing out at one point him like air drumming to the songs,
Yeah, and
right?
I was like, oh my God.
Like just being like stoked, I
Yeah.
mean, sort of fanning out a little bit, fanboying out a bit.
So how did you guys originally meet Jay?
They played a show in Champaign, right at Mabel's, right, Bob?
I don't, and we might have met him. I don't know if we met him there. I remember seeing. I think they were on tour with Not a Surf then, maybe.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
like,
I
it
remember
may have been through Corm actually, because we did go to. We played a show in DC at like a radio station, but it was outside of the radio station. And Kim
chatted a bit. I think Todd and I chatted with them at Mabel's.
Okay.
And I think we handed him a record, and that was the only thing that happened. We talked to Kim and maybe a little bit to Jay, because we were just like, "Hi, we're in a band. We think you're great." When we saw them,
and
that's the first time we met them. Go ahead, Bob.
But yeah, we were also friends with the Promise Ring. They had just recorded with him, I think, earlier that year or the year before. They did Nothing Feels Good, and so like we had that connection as well. So like Promise Ring could be like, vouch for us or something like that.
Yeah.
And then also we could, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
What did Jay like bring to the table for Braid that was new compared to making previous records?
I think this might have been the first time when we were making our first two records. It was really it was Chris and I, and it was pretty much all four of us having just wild ideas and like doing them. And then our friend was usually it was actually always our friend Andrew, who was basically just recording. He was like pressing buttons. He was the one that knew how to do it. This when we were doing Frame and Canvas, it might have been the first time that we were working with a real. I hesitate to say producer, but like kind of a producer, but definitely a collaborator who was going to be like, you know what? How about this harmony? Like nobody had said that to us before, and been like, and he's like a harmony master. He like comes up with some really cool things, and obviously he came up with some really cool sounds and production ideas. And
yeah, I remember him dialing in the guitars quite a bit, like getting a different. Like I was playing, like the tone I was playing was not a tone I was used to playing. Like I remember him dialing it in so that there was less distortion, but it was turned up, and it just sounded so much better on record. And he explained, he's like, it's going to sound better if we do this. Let me show you. And he turned the mid up, and he did this, and I just remembered like being like, oh, yeah. I think it was also, Bob, I think to your point, the first time someone cared a lot about what the output was going to be. Right.
Maybe it's the first time someone who's getting paid to record us.
Right. Maybe that's also.
But and also we only, it's been said a million times, we only had I think like 6 days to record it and mix it, so we had to like really work at it and not like mess around, which we used to do a lot with the first two
Yeah,
records.
it's not like we went in there though, and like we didn't have like, and we had a lot of time to be like, let's rearrange these songs and let's do an acoustic version and let's do, it was just like we had been already playing those songs live anyway for a couple of them for like a couple of years, or at least a few times.
Yeah.
A couple were old, right?
Yep.
Constellation Prize Fighter was a little bit
Urbana was old.
Urbana, and to us anyway, like a year. But we've been playing it live for years, so we were super dialed in. So we didn't need a lot of like, we didn't need to do 100 takes. It was like boom, because we toured on the way to get there. We've talked about this before, but so, but it was really just the tones that he got, I think he was just in it with us too. Like the energy was there. You could see he was air drumming. He was listening.
Yeah,
He was
like I was like, it's more like a collaborator more than like a director. He was like, he wanted to he plays the drums on at the end of Breathe In, like when we're all doing this like cacophony. He like ran in and started playing the drums. He's like, I just loved the energy, and we never worked with someone like that before.
Yeah, so that was fun.
That's amazing. So I know he also remixed and remastered the new reissue. I mean, it sounds great. Like it sounds like Framing Canvas, but like a little cleaner and more modern, and like doesn't ruin the essence of the original. Which, like, I think sometimes when bands announce a remixed reissue, fans might get like, "Are you going to ruin it?" So I'm wondering, like, tell us about the decision to do a new mix. Like, was there any sort of hesitation of like, are we gonna taint this perfect thing, like, or this thing that was imperfect, but that's what people love about it?
I think we were very cognizant of the fact that we didn't want to. Well, Damon has said this to us. I think he was saying that when Jay and he were talking, Jay had said something. Well, Bob, you can tell them how it happened. But when Jay and he were talking about it after we'd agreed to do it, was like, how far do you want me to go? Do you want me to go like all the way, like because nowadays people will like throw in a little autotune and maybe like tune the vocals up a bit, maybe redo. Should we redo guitars? And we were like, no, we're not going to do any of that at all. We're just gonna make it clean, mix it like you would now. Yeah, and the other thing that I remember that we wanted to do is just, I don't want to give him any notes. I just want him to mix it. Just take a first pass. Do it like you would, like if you were just going to mix it now, right? I'm sure he's listened to the record here and there, and he knows the record because he mixed it, right, and recorded it. But I wanted to have fresh ears for us too. I didn't want to go back and listen to Framing Canvas and go, oh, here, you could bring my guitar up here and all this stuff. I wanted to hear a fresh take so that I could then give notes on that fresh take. That was important to me. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with everything you said.
Yeah.
I didn't want to mess too much with what he maybe had been, and what maybe he'd kind of always wanted to bring to it, after hearing it after the fact, like, oh shit, I wish I had more time to work on it, or I wish I knew these other tricks or something, or this, I wish I had this knowledge or this unit here in my studio that's going to really, you know what I mean? So yeah, we just let him do it.
Yeah, we just were like, just make it sound like you would make a new record sound today. That's all.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's what it is, like it, because I put on the remaster earlier today, and I haven't heard the original in a while, but I went straight to the new one, and I was like, yeah, it sounds great, sounds like I remember. And then I went to Spotify and compared it, and I was like, oh, I do hear the difference. But yeah, it kind of sounds like the songs you remember with like the type of production style or mixing style that your ears are just currently used to.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've said this, and we've said it. It's like, did it need it? No. Is it fucking cool? Yeah. It's cool. It sounds good. There are other pieces of there that are neat, right? There's some extra, like, oh, I'm glad that this in this part of the song it's a little more balanced, right? Or in this part I can hear that thing that I didn't used to be able to hear, or whatever it is, right? So there's a few little nuggets in there that are like, oh, that's a little. I'm glad that's there now. I didn't hear that last time.
Let's talk about the actual songs on Frame and Canvas. I feel like it's the Braid album that people tend to like the most. What was different about this one when it came to writing it or recording it? Like, what were you hoping to achieve that Braid hadn't before?
We really didn't go into the recording process thinking that we were going to be making We definitely didn't think it was going to be our last album at the time, but we weren't also thinking we were going to make some, like, I don't know, statement. What Braid usually would do, and it was just the way we worked, was we wrote a bunch of songs. We were like, okay, it's time to do a new album. We've got some songs. Let's write a few more songs, go out and play them, and then that's going to be the album. We'll just set up a good order for the songs and make it sequence and flow well. Yeah, totally lost my train of thought.
No, well, but there was nothing special about, to us, there was nothing special about this record that was different than the other records, right? It's not like we came to this record going, let's make our best record or whatever. Like, I mean, I think every recording we did, we just went in going, we're going to record this and it's going to be awesome. We're going to have fun and we're going to put it out and people are going to like it, I hope, And
I don't want to downplay it too much, but maybe this will, but whatever. Like, I think the fact that we broke up kind of soon afterwards and then didn't really get back together, and for over 10 years, I guess. No, 10 years? Yeah, over 10. Like, so we broke up, and so that was the last album other than Movie Music, which kind of didn't count. But yeah, it was the last sort of thing that people had to listen to. And so think of examples like Sunny Day Real Estate or American Football, like these bands that have put out like their last record, and because it was the last one, it's the last one that everyone can listen to over and over and over again. And then it was like more anticipation towards like, I want to see these songs play live finally. So I think that probably helped, sort of the
legacy.
I was trying not to say legacy, but yeah, like of that record or whatever, just like the staying power of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I've read this thing, I think, in maybe various interviews or corners of the internet, that you had like this sort of friendly competitive nature on this album with like maybe bands you were friends with, like Promise Ring and Get Up Kids, or like proving yourself to the older Champagne bands like Hum or something. Like, would you elaborate on that?
I don't think we were really concerned too much about the Champagne bands like Hum or Poster Children. They were a little more, I mean, when we got there, that was like kind of like the college rock scene. They were a little older. We couldn't even get into those shows when we were, because it was 19 and over or whatever. And they were all on major labels at the time, even at that time. So they were a little like, we loved it. It was cool. And, we were kind of friends with them, but like, it was sort of, it was like tangential to us.
It was separate. Yeah. It was a whole other scene. Right?
But in terms of like competition, maybe, but I think probably it was more like we just were egging each other on, like, that's my God, Captain Jazz going on tour for 6 weeks. We got to go on tour for 6 weeks, or Promise Ring is doing this. Like, well, we got to do that too, or like do something like that.
Yeah, or someone's going to Europe. Like we how do we get over to Europe?
Yeah, totally.
And it's like an extension of like what we talked about. What I think we talked about earlier was like, when you see that there are shows happening in another suburb, well, how do I go over there and do that? Like, what's this?
But also we can then use some of their contacts too, right? Oh, Promise Ring went and did this. Oh, great. Like, what's that person's number? Like, so we can go do that. Or like you said, you had a great show in Montreal. Let's give us that number.
Who did the show? Yeah, and we did a lot of sharing like that anyway. But I do think if I look back at that time, I don't think that competitiveness was necessarily there. I don't think it was super competitive, but there was like a like when we heard that Promise Ring had recorded with Jay Robbins, like, and then we were going to do it. It was like, oh yeah, we should do that, and I also think that when we saw people doing, and I'll say the kind of the same thing I said before, is that when we saw people doing something cool live, like we wouldn't straight up rip it off, but we were influenced by that, right? So if Promise Ring did something cool, or Get Up Kids, or Karate, or all these other bands that we had been playing with, or June of 44, or Crown Hate Ruin, or all these bands were doing these interesting things, those little nuggets really all influenced us. Like, God, that's so cool how they do that. We should do a thing like that. And I don't know that it was always conscious, certainly, but there was sometimes like, oh, you hear that part that we're just doing? That kind of sounds like this. Let's do a thing where we add a little break here. We do a little extra beat, because that'll make it cool. It'll throw people off, but we'll keep it, steady. Just all this, it was playful. I feel like we were all throwing stuff around, not only influence wise, but also help wise, right? Oh, we had this good show here. We should do this. Hey, you guys should come play here with us because of this. So while there was like, friendly competition when we would play like with Get Up Kids in like Kansas City, and the crowd would go crazy for them, and then and be like, there's Braid. They're pretty good, Like I remember leaving the stage after some of those shows, being like, oh man, that wasn't our crowd, But and then being like going into Champaign and people being like, oh Braid, you guys are great, or wherever, Chicago, playing at Metro, and being with other bands, right? Or at the drive-in, blowing us off the stage, opening for us at Fireside Bowl, and being like, "Fuck, how are we going to follow that?" So there was, there was some of that, but I think we were having Jay Robbins do that record and doing it at Inner Ear, to me, maybe in some way legitimized what we were doing a little bit too. Like this is like, you should pay attention to what we're doing. We're doing some cool stuff, So that may be part of it too.
Just, I guess, a little bit related. Well, how did you feel when you first heard, like, say, Nothing Feels Good? I mean, like, being that the one that they did with Jay, and that was kind of a huge step up for them. And, I only know that record as, like, an iconic, important on every emo list album. So how did that sound in 1997,
Really slick, but like I'm not saying that in a disparaging way. It was really cool. And the other album that like really just blew me away was Clarity. Like first hearing Clarity, I was just like, they're just taking it to a different level. Now they're just showing off.
Yeah,
But like,
I thought it was. I remember hearing Clarity and thinking it was too slick. Like I don't like this production, because we weren't used to stuff sounding good.
yeah, right.
We were used to it sounding like it sounded, like muffled and whatever else, right? And stuff like that. But yeah.
So, you mentioned this, of course, being the last Braid record for many, many years. Why did Braid break up after, releasing such a monumental album?
It's funny because I don't want to belabor the point, but that like we didn't really think we were happy with the album, but we weren't like, this is monumental, like we need to get out there and play. Like it got to the point, I think, and Chris can jump, I'll shut up here in a second, but like we had been out on the road for so long with each other, like for 24/7, and for a while we lived together in Champaign, and I think there were shows after Framing Canvas came out that weren't really that great, and we were arguing and just weren't getting along because just, I don't know, things weren't working in the way we kind of wanted them to, especially after like touring nonstop for like kind of 2 years. But yeah, so I think we just needed time away from each other, I think.
Yeah. I think
no personal space at all. Not a thing.
No. Yeah. I mean, we knew each other's, and I think I've said this, I don't know when the last time I said it was, years ago, but we knew each other's quirks, man. I knew Bob's quirks. I knew everybody's quirks, and they all, everybody drove everybody nuts, I mean, and, if had I known now what had I known then what I know now, we would have been like, oh, maybe we should take a 6 month or a year hiatus and see what happens, and not make this decision and whatever. But I remember thinking like, well, there's scenes like our scene. There must be other scenes out there like this that have like other booking agents and all this stuff. Like let's go explore what those are, right? And we had taken it. I think I remember feeling like, because some of these shows were not great, right? And like, when is this ever going to get easier, right? And it didn't feel like it was going to get easier, right? And I remember feeling just stuck, you know, um, and and that came out in various ways, right? In not unhealthy ways, and so I think we all just had enough, and these guys were like, yeah, dude, that's enough, So, but that's we recorded those the last three songs we recorded were, what were the songs?
Please Drive
Circus of the
Faster.
Stars, Please Drive Faster, and
You're Lucky to Be Alive.
You're Lucky to Be Alive. And that was going to be the demo for the next record. And we were in the studio, and soon as that mix was done, we're like, let's go outside and have a meeting. I think we were just even in the studio just driving each other nuts. And so we went outside and we were just like, and I had been, I didn't go to like, uh, I was starting to kind of fade out for whatever reason because I was just getting frustrated, I think. And I was late to a show in fucking Louisville for Crazy Fest. I didn't mean to be. I wasn't trying to be, but I was late. So Braid set up on the stage. Bob and Todd and Damon got all set up my gear. I missed the set time. So they let us play the next day. And like, it was just, that was like, okay, there's something wrong. Right. And I think we just sort of buried that for a little bit, and then it just came out all at once in the next while we were doing that. I hate that happened, but you know what? I mean, everything else wouldn't have happened, otherwise. I think we all did some other cool stuff afterwards. So, but it's really fun to be playing all this stuff again and back together. We've all stayed friends, which is awesome. There was a time where we didn't talk that much for a year or two, but I remember going to see Hey Mercedes at one point in Chicago and being like, "Hey, I just want to say hi. I'm here," And so we started being friendly again, and that's kind of what happened.
I think it's important that we got together and wrote and released another album too. I think that was something that I don't know. I'm very proud that we were able to do it. We're not just like a Jawbreaker, right? Like they're going to play the same songs. There's no new songs, as far as I know. I hope there are new songs, but like
not
it's pretty important. No, God, no.
Huge influence on all.
I am so sorry, but yeah.
No, but the truth is too. It's like, I think what's interesting is it allowed us in 2010 to open a little new chapter, right? What are we going to do next, right? We're going to get back together. We don't want to keep playing the same old songs forever if we're going to keep doing this, right? Should we write some new stuff? And so we'll see. I mean, whenever we get together, we sometimes talk about, oh, should we do stuff? Yeah, we haven't decided to do anything yet, but doesn't mean we won't.
Yeah, awesome. And for what it's worth, Jawbreaker have said maybe new music might happen.
Yeah,
so we'll see.
Cool.
We'll see.
I can't wait.
I'm all here. Yeah.
And if Blake wants to reunite Jets to Brazil, that would also be cool with me.
Of course it would.
A lot of people would like that.
So I have like a few points I want to follow up on, but let's go to Braid breaks up, and I felt like at that point it was a little bit of like an end of an era because Braid had broken up, like Mineral had broken up, Knapsack had broken up, Jimmy Eat World got dropped from their label. But then it's like fast forward 2 years and Jimmy Eat World is like the biggest band in the world, and then emo is like this popular thing. What was your reaction to that happening and kind of being like, wait, like this thing we were part of for 3 years later is now like the thing? Maybe we could be part of. You had Hey Mercedes and Firebird Band at that time, and I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Hey Mercedes maybe latched a little bit more onto that, like did tours with like Dashboard, Saves the Day, Thursday.
Yeah.
But what was kind of going through your minds when you're like, wait, we and our friends helped make this thing, and now it's like on television?
I thought it was cool. I was very, and to this day, I have family members that are like, oh, aren't you pissed that blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, whatever. Like, I'm fine with it. That band's like, I don't know, Fall Out Boy or somebody could be like, yeah, we liked Braid. We're influenced by Braid or Paramore or something like that. Like, fuck yeah, that's awesome. Like, and I don't, you're right. Hey Mercedes was on Vagrant, so we were able to be a little bit in that wave of it, and never, so we weren't necessarily like, oh God, I wish Braid was still together so we could be a part of this. And would we have been a part of it? I don't know. There's all this like, well, maybe we wouldn't have, maybe we would have. I don't know. But like, we never I never really second guessed that sort of decision. And as far as that music becoming more popular, like when I first heard the Fall Out Boy song on the radio, the Sugar We're Going Down, I was like, man, this sounds like our era. And it sounds like our era, but it's maybe a little more produced. But it sounds like a song I would have loved. Like, and maybe I do like that song. So like, that was cool, but it was more of like that's clearly influenced by Braid, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I think I remember being like, "Oh man, like listen to this shit. This shit's like blowing up, right?" And I was on a different label. I was on Cargo Headhunter at the time, and I was trying to do something different, right? I was actively trying to do something. I was like, I already did that. I'm going to try something different, and it worked. It worked to whatever degree it worked, right? People came and it was fun, but certainly didn't work to the same degree that like Paramore or those bands did years later, right? Or I don't know when My Chemical Romance came out, probably
Yeah, a
2003 or
little
4
after
or
that, yeah.
something. Yeah, after that. But like that stuff, when I started to see this stuff blowing up, like Jimmy rolled up bands that we used to like that used to open for us, like, and At the Drive-In blew up like pretty much right after we broke up. At the Drive-In really shot, 99, 2000, they blew up. And I just remember thinking like, you know, at the time I was like, fuck this shit, I'm done with this shit. I was going to go back to school, I was going to do this band, and is there a part of me that thinks about that sometimes, like, oh, I wonder what. Yeah, sure, I mean, I'm not going to lie, right? But I'm not sitting here like pining for like, oh man, did I ruin my life? No, I have, things are good. And it's nice for me, like look, what Bob said. I think it's
You're
nice.
an important soccer coach now.
Yeah, that's right. No, well, but it's nice for me to hear people, our name gets dropped quite a bit here and there in a lot of things, and it's nice to know that we do, and I think we do still have an influence on this scene, and that we did have such an influence. I think that's where I feel good about it, It's like, oh man,
And we toured so much, right? So I think a lot of those bands were able to maybe come see us play and see us sort of like jump around like idiots on stage, and maybe that had something to do with it. It's like all cyclical, right? Because this is why we wanted to be in a band, right? We saw
right.
this band come through, and we're like, oh my god, that I need that amp, and I want that guitar, and I love the way or that person, like,
Yeah, I love their stage presence. I
you
love
know,
their
and I
stuff.
was
Yeah,
like, oh, they're having so much fun, like they're so much fun to see. We need to be like a must see band because it's so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, I think like yeah, I agree to your point, Chris. Like Braid's legacy continues to influence bands, and like just when that stuff all blew up, like Braid and a lot of your peers were just instantly the bands that younger listeners like me were told like, well, this was important, because like it was. I think it's like this funny like double-edged sword with the word emo because so many people hate it. But the thing about it getting so big is that when it did, like there were a lot of other people who were like, well, if emo is important to you, you got to go right to Braid and to Cap and Jazz and like so. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, anyway, I'm just kind of rambling,
No,
but
no, no, it's cool because what I'm hearing you say, right? Because you're of a different era, right? And so what I'm hearing you say is that the same kind of stuff that happened to me, right? I wasn't around when Minor Threat was around, right? But someone showed me Minor Threat because I was getting into like I heard Bad Religion and heard about Peg Boy and heard about these bands. They're like, you should listen to this, right? And then we went to the source, right? Now Minor Threat's a little bit different. They had a little, a lot, probably a heavier influence on everything than we ever did. But it's nice for me to feel because I think about bands like that influenced me, like the Big Boys or Minor Threat or whatever, and I'm like, I know in my head and from reading stuff online or whatever, seeing articles that we're that band for other people, that got people to this kind of stuff. And honestly, that's more important than I ever thought we'd ever be, like back then or anything else, so does that make sense?
yeah. I mean, I think that's just like, the trajectory that a lot of music fans take is like, I love this thing, so I want to see who influenced it, where it came from. And then now I love their influence and I want to find their influence. And like, I
Right.
mean, that's why Minor Threat is still big with like teenagers today. Cause it's
Yeah.
like, I don't know if you're getting into, I don't know,
Hardcore.
Machine Gun Kelly or something, then like maybe somebody tells you like, he's doing like pop punk with Travis Barker, but then Travis Barker loves Minor Threat. So, I don't know, like,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so at what point did you start to realize like Frame and Canvas was a record that kind of did have a legacy that people were talking about as this important, influential album?
I don't know. I don't know. I know that
I don't know. Yeah.
I think it was probably Polyvinyl where because Polyvinyl is, in addition to them being like amazing, they're very on top of things. So, and when I mean that, I mean like business wise. So will send you like, here's what you've been selling. Here's what, your royalties for whatever. Like they're so on top of it. Like they're like a dream label to be on
Yeah.
because you're never like, well, wait a minute. Like what? They're so transparent. They're the sweetest people ever. They want to help. They're super fun. They're very like supportive. Um, maybe it was that, them saying like, people are listening to this more. We want to do maybe a reissue of it on a colored
Yeah. I
vinyl.
think,
We want to do like a
yeah.
picture disc. And we were like, oh, okay, people are really liking it. And then I think that the American football thing happened before. I don't know, but then it became the time to do, I think, like the 20 or 15-year anniversary of
15,
Frame
yeah.
and Canvas, and that's when we were like, let's do that. And it was right after that we um, did No Coast.
Yeah, I think we
Met up.
decided like, oh yeah, we did it must have been 2013 because that would have been 15, 14 years, right? 15 years. Yeah, 15. So we were doing that and that I think, we had already kind of started hanging out. Bob and I started DJing together and hanging out and I was living in the city and he was too and we're both single and ready to mingle and he he was he was DJing. He's like, you got to come DJ this emo night. It's kind of fun. And people would come out and know that we were DJing. They'd come out and hang out, and that was another thing, and then around that time, 2010 ish, some of these like, some of these lists started popping up, like best emo albums of all time and stuff. And we started seeing that stuff like here and there, and Framing Canvas would always be on those lists. And I was like, oh, what? Like, wow, and if it wasn't on a list, somebody'd be like, why the fuck isn't Framing Canvas on here? Right. I mean, not me, but somebody else. Right. And I would see that.
One of your pseudonyms, your troll
My,
pseudonyms.
yeah, right. Right. My dad. No. But anyway, yeah, man. So, I hope it continues to resonate and we're going to go out and play it soon. And, it's super fucking fun to play, man. It's super fun to play. And I still feel like the songs are good songs. I like playing them. They're and I feel it like I felt it, back then. So, I mean, different. I mean, I'm not the same person I used to be, but you know, I'm a totally different person. No, no, but just different. But it's. I'm rambling now, but it does feel good. We played it this weekend. It's super fun to play, and I'm just excited to get out there and like drop it on people's heads. Kill it.
And I'll say that I need to start like running on a treadmill or something
Little
like that,
cardiac.
like because
Yeah.
because I could see I need to bring, whatever. I can't be hobbling around every night on stage.
Yeah. Got to bring that energy out.
Yeah.
Well, you guys were killer on the last reunion tour. I think I saw you maybe 2 or 3 times.
Awesome. Thanks.
Nice.
Yeah. So,
Nice.
so just kind of one last bit on that influence note. So, like, like we had kind of said, like this emo explosion happens. Braid is like kind of one of the forebears. Then you get like the late 2000s, early 2010s, the whole sort of emo revival thing, where I feel like you have these bands really even more directly tapping into what you and a lot of your peers were doing. And that's when you come back with No Coast. So and you put it out on Top Shelf, which I feel like is a label that really took after Polyvinyl in a lot of ways. And you did it with Will Yip, who kind of was like the guy for like this era. You had like a split with Balance and Composure around that time. So were you sort of looking at the new generation of bands and being like, oh, hey, they're kind of doing it like we were doing it in the 90s a little bit, like taking it away from that
Well,
yeah.
You're shaking your head. Right?
I was going like this. And
You're
Chris was
nodding.
going
He's shaking his. Yeah. Like,
for me, I mean, I could hear it in some of those new bands. Like I can hear it, right? I'm like, oh, that's a Braid part, or whatever, right? But that's not why I did it, right? That's not why I don't think we did it. We had gotten together and been hanging out. We did that EP with Jay Robbins, then we did that Framing Canvas tour, and it was like we should just write a new record, right? Let's do a new record. And maybe there was maybe in the back of my head there was some other like, oh, this is kind of people are doing this now. Maybe this makes sense to do it right now. But from my perspective, it was just like, well, let's just do this. We're doing this. We're excited about it. But maybe if email had gone and died somewhere and nobody was interested in that style of music, maybe we'd be thinking differently. I don't know. I can't answer.
the maybe a little different point. Like the thing that I obviously Chris and I had started hanging out. We were going to be doing these Framing Canvas shows. We started writing songs. Todd and Damon were on board. Yes, let's do a new record. I was very, very concerned that it was going to sound like four old dudes, like trying, not even trying their best. You know what I mean? Just like,
right.
We called the album No Coast because we didn't want to sound like four dudes like coasting through, like, we're going to try to do the reunion circuit now or something like that, or pretend like we're part of this. Like, so it was really important that we wanted the album to have an energy that of like our youth. I'm not saying we weren't capable of that. We were, but it's just, we were just older, and I just didn't want us to become complacent or lazy. And so, and I'm not saying if we worked with Jay Robbins on No Coast, we wouldn't have been lazy. We would have been like, but maybe we would have been more comfortable. Like, but so that's why, that's one of the reasons, at least, why we considered Will Yip and then went with Will Yip, because he was like excited to do it, and like a new sort of voice, working with all of these new bands. And that's what we kind of wanted to push ourselves in that way. And maybe Framing Canvas sounds urgent because we had to do it really fast. And like, I don't know, it was important to me, at least, to not make No Coast sound like, like, ugh. They probably could have done without,
that's right.
doing this. Like,
we were cognizant of that. We were very cognizant of making sure that this record was of No Coast, that No Coast was going to be a record in its own right, and not just like, oh, let's just throw a record out there, right? We wanted to make sure. And to be honest, we didn't have a whole lot of time for No Coast either. I mean, it wasn't like we had, a month and a half, and we had maybe like 2 or 3 times as much time from Framing Canvas, like maybe 10 or 15 days instead of 5, right? So there's still a frenetic pace there to the way that we did that record. I mean, are there new techniques we used and things like that for guitars and things like that, like more modern ideas and stuff? Sure. But yeah, I guess you're right, Bob. When we talk about why we went with Will Yip and stuff, that was part of it. We wanted, and the other reason we went with Top Shelf was we wanted to go. I remember we had a manager at the time that was saying, I think at the time Polyvinyl was leaning away from some of the emo stuff, doing other stuff. And so I think our Polyvinyl and us had a conversation, and we were talking about, should we do it with someone else? And our manager's like, maybe you do it with Top Shelf, because they're doing a lot of bands that are doing this twinkle core style and this other stuff, and I don't know if it was just twinkle core stuff, but anyway, like that kind of style. So that's the other reason we went with Top Shelf at the time, because really Polyvinyl was leaning away from that stuff, right? And so,
and we spoke to them. We had conversations.
It wasn't like we were like, see you later, and they were like, see you later. We had conversations about it to be open. So yeah, I guess there was we were kind of aware of that whole, we got to go to the right places to do this, instead of like just dialing it in and being like, oh, cool, here we go, so.
Mm-hmm. But even also just outside of like why you made those decisions, I guess another thing I was sort of wondering too is like, just seeing bands like, you use the word twinkle core, like seeing bands do that stuff again and do it on this DIY level. Did you feel any sort of like, hey, like we have a lot in common with these bands, maybe more so than we ever might have with Fall Out Boy or something?
Oh, for sure. It was to be honest, it's like it was taking what we did, but making it new and cooler and definitely more virtuose, whatever. There was more
Yeah.
virtuosity with like these bands that were doing like tapping and all that stuff, which is like I can't do that. Like, but it's really cool, and also them bringing that to the table. It's not like they were trying to emulate Fall Out Boy or like some of the band like Paramore, or some of the bands that were
Right.
big at the time or whatever. They were like, that's cool. We want to do a Captain Jazz, a play on Captain Jazz and Braid, and do this and yell a little bit and have it be a little discordant and do some weird time signatures and play the hell out of like I can't even watch
Yeah.
them play guitar without being like I don't even know how to do it and like
Right.
all these messed up tunings and stuff. But like so yeah, I'm impressed by it for sure.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and I do think that DIY level, like you brought this up the other day. We were talking about that Top Shelf show that we did in at the fest in 20. When was that?
13 maybe or
13
ish.
or 14. We were going to do this. We did this Top Shelf show after the fest in Florida, and it
In
was
like a parking garage, like by a
it was,
parking
in,
garage
it
or
was
like
like
a
in
storage garage.
storage garage in the middle of nowhere in like the swamp, right outside of
Pitch
Gainesville.
black, yeah.
Pitch black, and like they had a power generator for the bands, and we were like, this is so old school, this is so going to be so fun. We got there, we got set up, we're like, all right, we're next, it's going to be awesome. And we're set up, we were like one note into the first song and the cops show up. So it was definitely DIY style, and the bands that were around, like that it was the same, literally the same feeling that we used to have in 98, 97, 96 when we were doing shows like that. So yeah, that scene was back then, like at that time back, and it was super strong. And I think it probably still is there. I'm just not around it very much these days.
Yeah. Anyway, it's been really fun. Do you guys have anything else you want to add before we head out?
Just I'm excited to see everybody again.
Yeah, really excited to get out and play, and happy to like be on stage and killing it for everybody. I really can't wait to see everybody.
All right, guys. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
Thanks, Andrew. Bye-bye.
All right.
Hey, thanks again to Bob and Chris. Thanks for listening. Go listen to Frame and Canvas if you never have. I can't stress enough how important and influential and amazing this record is. You can pick it up on white, clear, and blue splatter vinyl in the Brooklyn Vegan store. It's limited to just 300 copies. It's the original mix of the album, so get that while it lasts. The link is in the description of this episode. And hey, if you like what you heard, give us a good rating. It only takes a little bit and it goes a long way. Tell your friends about us, subscribe. Any little bit helps. It's really, really appreciated. Thanks so much and see you next time.